This video continues from the previous video. Okay, so sequence and chronology. Chronology refers to the time in which things happen, and sequence refers to the order in which the story unfolds within your work, which may or may not happen in the order that it happened in real time. Now, so here you go. Sequence of Coke cans crumpling in sequence. Okay, that's a sequence. We have a perfectly good Coke can, and then we start to squeeze it. Right now, we know that if we put each one of those individual images, we photographed it, put one image on each page and flipped it, I would fill in the gaps and we would see the whole, we would see the animation. But this is a great way to start pulling out design elements for your work in a sequence. Find a sequence of events and use that sequence of events from a plan view, to evolve the progression of your building. Okay, so in architecture, design is sequential, can be, even when the structure itself is frozen in time. Here you see the Fibonacci sequence, which we've previously discussed, and a lot of architects such as Corbu have used it. And it can be, in this case, the constraints of the Fibonacci sequence were used to define the layout of the building, and it created this really cool design. Bernard Tschumi explored sequential architecture as a series of planes through time. A person experiences a building in a sequential order important to the experience. And if you think about it, that's true. And so he created this book, and I think it's the next thing. So you see all these sketches, right? That's sliced. Take your building and slice it, right? So as you walk in the front door, take all these slices. And that's what this represents. That's what all these represent, these beautiful slices. And then they're pulled apart to create this really interesting abstraction. Okay, so this is the Manhattan transcripts. Bernard Tschumi, this is an excerpt from his book. He did these sketches, and you can see how he does these overlapping, this repetition, which we're going to talk about next when we get to, well, not next, but after, when we get to the principles in Module 3. This sequence, this sequential events. And so what ultimately it allows us to do, if we look at buildings as moments frozen in time, how does that shape and transform the way we create habitable space? It's really, really something important to think about, because it's easy to think of static elements that don't move or don't have any progression to them. And it gets a whole lot harder when we start thinking about that adaptation or that evolution of objects in motion. And so it could be something you explore. It's just simple as, what happens if I take this space and then rotate the next space next to it by 10 degrees and the next space next to it by 10 degrees, and I start to create this series of tumbling shapes. What outline, or if I go back around, right, and I outline that now, what kind of outline does that create? And then I look at it from the three-dimensional, when I start looking at it as a mass or a form, then I start looking at it as a shape in that capacity. What does that look like? Is that more interesting than if I had just built a rectangle? And my opinion is always. Yeah, you could do some pretty interesting things with a shoebox, but eventually the shoebox gets tiresome. And a lot of houses are just giant shoeboxes. And they're quite functional. Form follows function in all of them. But as far as design, sometimes they're kind of lacking and short on creativity. And this exploration beyond the obvious starts to allow us to come up with some really clever and creative solutions. Okay, so we're going to stop here, and this will conclude this series.